It began in silence, or at least in the kind of silence that only late summer nights can hold. The quiet wasn't the absence of sound so much as the world's decision to pause, as though time itself had leaned forward, listening in. I hadn't meant to stare, but when she looked at me across that dimly lit kitchen, I forgot how to breathe. Hours earlier, the house had been alive with voices, with the smells of grilled food and the clatter of emptying bottles, with laughter echoing out into the yard where fireflies had blinked like tiny, restless stars. But now, long after the last guest had slipped away and the porch light had dimmed to an amber glow, it was just the two of us. My buddy, her son, had disappeared into the night with nothing more than a wink and a slap on the back, leaving me behind with a teasing remark about how his mom would surely put me to work. I laughed at it then, not thinking much of the weight behind the joke, but now here she was, barefoot in the kitchen, her hair undone just enough to look unguarded, the top buttons of her blouse open in a way that suggested comfort, rather than any conscious intention, though even that line blurred when I tried to convince myself otherwise. She moved easily, yet every step seemed heightened in my awareness, like the soft thud of her heel against the hardwood was amplified in the stillness. "Still here?" she asked with a gentle smile, passing me a dish towel without waiting for an answer. Her tone was casual, but her eyes lingered, as if weighing something unsaid. I took the towel, fumbling a little more than I wanted to admit. "Didn't want to leave you with all this," I said, nodding at the counter piled with half-washed dishes. "Besides, I owe you. The food was incredible." She let out a small laugh, low and warm, though she didn't look at me immediately. Instead, her gaze dropped toward the sink, where the water shimmered faintly under the glow of the overhead light. "Well," she murmured, "you always were polite. Not like the rest of them." Her words carried softness, but also something more deliberate, a subtle probing, as if she were quietly testing how much space existed between what she was allowed to say and what she wanted to admit. The air was different now. It wasn't simply another late-night cleanup at a friend's house. It felt weighted, charged, each breath I drew reminding me how close we stood, how the perfume she wore, faded but still clinging like a whisper of the night before, hung between us. I dried a glass slowly, my movements too careful, too rehearsed, and finally asked, "You okay? You seem, I don't know, tired?" For a moment she didn't answer, only stared at the soap bubbles sliding along the plate in her hand. Then she turned her face toward me, her eyes holding mine with a quiet honesty that hit harder than I expected. "Yeah," she said softly. "Just been a long week." There was a pause, heavier this time, before she added in a near whisper, "Actually, it's been a long few years." I froze, the towel still in my hands, unsure what to say. She brushed a hand through her hair, and in that moment I noticed the changes in her face, the slight wear that hadn't been there years ago. She was still beautiful, undeniably so, but there was a fragility woven into her now, a kind of invisible thread unraveling at the edges. "You ever feel like everyone thinks you're fine, so they stop asking?" she asked suddenly. Her voice trembled, though just barely. I nodded, swallowing more truth than I wanted to reveal. More than I'd like to admit. That was the moment when the ground beneath us shifted, not with grand drama or sharp revelation, but with something far subtler and far more dangerous, honesty. We were no longer my friend's mother and the polite kid she remembered. We were two people, standing too close, stripped of the roles we had used as armor. She reached across me then, reaching for another plate, and the back of her fingers brushed against my wrist, a fleeting touch, light and unintentional on the surface, but enough to freeze us both in place. My skin burned where she'd touched me. She stilled, her hand suspended between us, as though trapped in time, the quiet filled only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of a hallway clock. When her eyes lifted to mine again, I saw the conflict there, sharp and raw. She started, but the words faltered, dissolving into the air. I stepped back instinctively, giving her space, expecting her to retreat, but instead she moved forward just slightly, her hand rising slowly, hesitantly, and coming to rest against my chest. The pressure was faint, barely there, but it might as well have been a brand pressed into me, declaring something neither of us had dared to speak aloud. My heart pounded not with fear or guilt, but with the aching, bewildering intensity of a truth I couldn't ignore. She met my gaze, her voice soft but steady. "Do you ever think that maybe something good can come from something unexpected?" I didn't have words, only the look in my eyes, the one that said yes, even though none of it made sense, even though it crossed lines that were supposed to remain untouched. Then her phone buzzed against the counter, the sound loud and jarring against the stillness. She flinched as if struck, snatching her hand away, her face pulled taut as she reached for the device. A name flashed on the screen, one I recognized immediately, and everything shifted once more. The spell broke. She silenced the call quickly, sliding the phone across the counter as though it burned her fingers. "I should get some sleep," she whispered, though she didn't move. Neither did I. My pulse thundered from the memory of her fingers against me, the warmth still lingering like a phantom. But what haunted me wasn't only the physical touch, it was the look in her eyes, the crack in her voice that betrayed the effort it took to hold herself together. "I can head out," I said at last, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "Didn't mean to make anything weird." She shook her head firmly. "You didn't. It's not you." There was a pause heavy with things unsaid, and then she looked back at me, her expression faltering. "You know, I was married for 17 years. Her voice was tired, almost flat, but beneath it was a note of confession. By the end, we were just going through the motions. He stopped seeing me. I stopped caring. I said nothing, only listened, the air in the room thick with the weight of her memories. I've spent the last 2 years convincing myself that being alone is better than being invisible," she continued. "Most days I believe it. But then you look at me like that." She stopped, her voice breaking just slightly. I didn't ask, "Like what?" because I already knew. I remembered the first time I had ever sat at her table as a kid, watching her laugh at something her son had said, how the room had seemed brighter just because she was in it. Even then, at 15, I thought she was amazing. She smiled faintly at the memory, sad but genuine. "You were, 16? And completely in awe." The silence that followed was thick, weighted not with awkwardness but with unspoken acknowledgement. The age gap was undeniable. So was the history. I was 26 now, she was 47, my best friend's mother. The lines between what was right and what was honest had blurred the moment her hand touched my chest. "You don't think this is crazy?" she asked, her voice low, fragile. "Of course it's crazy," I admitted. "But I can't ignore how I feel, and I don't think you can either." Her eyes dropped, her jaw clenched, her fingers worrying at the hem of her sleeve. She had built walls over years, fortresses made from survival and practicality, and now those walls were cracking. "I don't know how to want something that feels this risky," she whispered. "You don't have to decide tonight," I said quietly. "But don't lie to yourself just to be safe." She picked up a photo from the counter, her and her son at the beach years ago. She stared at it for a moment before setting it down again, her hand brushing against mine as if by accident, or maybe not by accident. We froze, the distance between us measured not in inches but in breaths. Then slowly, she turned her hand over, allowing mine to settle on top of it. No words, no promises, just a moment suspended, fragile and charged with meaning. Something inside both of us shifted again, and this time neither of us pulled away. The weight of her hand beneath mine lingered like a secret neither of us had dared to put into words, a fragile tether binding us in the silence of that kitchen. The clock ticked somewhere down the hallway, a reminder that time was still moving, though it felt suspended between us, caught in the fragile breath of a moment we both knew was dangerous but impossible to step away from. And then, as if the universe had conspired to remind us of the risks we were courting, the unmistakable sound of footsteps approached from the porch, heavy, uneven, too familiar to be ignored. Her hand snapped back like it had touched fire, and I stumbled away, my pulse spiking into my throat. A knock followed, sharp against the doorframe, and then his voice. Her son's voice, my best friend's voice, rang out into the quiet. "Mom, you still up?" She glanced at me, her face pale, her eyes wide with panic, and for a split second I thought she might tell me to run. Instead, I whispered, "I'll go out the back." She shook her head almost violently, her voice tight. "Number, wait." She straightened, pulled her shoulders back, and in one deep inhale composed herself with the kind of practiced grace only years of hiding emotions could teach. She moved to the door and opened it just a crack, her voice deliberately steady as she greeted him. "Everything okay?" He stood there with the kind of casual confusion of someone who hadn't expected to find his mother awake. "Yeah, I forgot my keys. Thought maybe I left them in the kitchen." Her eyes flicked toward me, frozen half in shadow, and in that small hesitation I felt the peril of discovery close around us. She opened the door wider, forcing a small smile, and let him step inside. His gaze swept the room, and then it landed on me. "Dude, you're still here?" His smirk carried no suspicion, only playful ribbing, but the weight of his glance nearly crushed me. "Yeah," I managed, feigning casual calm, "just helping clean up." He shook his head with a grin. "You're a better son than I am." The laugh that followed from her lips was too sharp, too loud, and it nearly gave us away. "He's been a lifesaver," she added quickly, her tone brittle. I forced a grin, but inside I was screaming, wondering if my face betrayed the truth burning beneath the surface. He grabbed his keys from the counter, oblivious to the storm hanging in the air. "All right, I'm out." "Night." She nodded, her voice clipped. "I'm fine," she said before he could press further. He stepped back outside, and the door shut behind him, with a finality that made my lungs release the breath I'd been holding. The silence afterward struck like a slap, sharp and punishing. "That was close," I whispered, my body still trembling with adrenaline. She turned toward me, her face blank, her voice low and rigid. "That can't happen again." Her words carved through the moment, but even as she spoke them, I could see in her eyes the truth that contradicted her resolve. I wanted to believe her, to agree and walk away, but I couldn't. I watched her turn to the sink, staring out the window into the void of the night as though it might provide her an escape. "I feel like I'm living in two lives at once," she whispered, her reflection ghosted in the glass. "One where I do the safe thing, and one where I don't." I stepped closer, careful not to touch, yet close enough for her to feel the heat of my presence. My voice was quiet, honest. "I'm not trying to complicate your life, but I can't lie. I think about you constantly. I don't know when it started, I just know it won't stop." When she turned, we were face to face, so close that our breaths tangled in the inches of air between us. Her eyes flickered to my lips, her resolve faltering, her hand hovering uncertainly near mine. "I shouldn't," she said, but her voice betrayed her. "But you want to," I replied softly. Her lips parted slightly, and for the smallest heartbeat we leaned in, our foreheads almost touching, the charge between us like electricity, humming in the walls. Then, just as the moment teetered on the edge of surrender, her phone buzzed again, louder this time, demanding, insistent. She startled back as though pulled from a dream. "It's him," she said, her voice tight. "My ex. He's been texting. Wants to meet." The world fell cold again. I tried to mask the disappointment tearing at me, nodding as though it didn't matter. "Maybe I should leave," I said quietly. She didn't stop me, not with words, but as I reached for the door, her voice broke through, barely audible, fragile. "I didn't want you to stop me." I froze, turning back, my chest pounding. Her eyes held mine, full of all the things she hadn't allowed herself to say. Neither of us moved. The air thickened with everything unresolved, everything impossible to ignore. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay awake, replaying the words over and over, her whisper, her gaze, the way she said, "I didn't want you to stop me." By morning, the weight of it had become unbearable. I drove back, no text, no call, just raw need propelling me forward. When she opened the door, her hair tied up, her sweater loose, her face free of any practiced expression, she looked startled, even scared. "What are you doing here?" she whispered sharply. "I need to know," I said. "I need to know if you meant it, what you said last night." She glanced toward the staircase, her voice tense. "My son is upstairs. You can't just show up like this." I stepped inside anyway, my words tumbling out, unstoppable. "I've been losing my mind thinking about you. I know it's messy and wrong and complicated, but I'm not pretending anymore." Her hands trembled as she backed into the hallway, every step betraying her fear and her need to escape. "Stop," she said. "Don't say that." "I already did," I shot back. She faltered, her shoulders sagging under the weight of confession. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice cracking. "Scared of what this means, scared of what I'll lose. I already gave everything to a man who made me feel invisible. I won't do it again." "I'm not him," I said, firm but not unkind. Her eyes flashed, sharp with conflict. "You're not supposed to be anyone to me," she snapped suddenly, anger masking the fear in her voice. "You're my son's best friend. You're 26. What do you think this is?" My heart thundered, but my voice held steady. "I think it's real. I think every time you look at me and then look away, you feel it too." She turned sharply, walking into the kitchen, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. I followed, watching her brace herself against the counter, as though she could anchor her storming thoughts there. "You think this is easy for me?" she asked, her tone harsh. I lie awake wondering what kind of woman lets herself want this, want you. "Then stop lying," I said. "Wanting someone isn't shameful. Hiding it is." She looked at me like she hated how much truth she heard in my voice, and for a long moment the tension between us quaked like a fault line. Finally, her voice dropped low, almost a whisper. "Last night when I said I didn't want you to stop me, I meant I wanted you to kiss me." The air split open with her admission. I stepped forward slowly, every movement deliberate. She didn't retreat. "I'm not chasing ghosts," I said firmly. "If you don't want this, tell me now." Her breathing grew uneven, her chest rising and falling as if the truth had finally broken free of her ribs. "I can't stop thinking about you," she said at last. "That night, you helped clean up. I stood here for an hour after you left, asking myself what the hell I was doing, and now—" Her eyes locked on mine, steady and unflinching. "Now I don't care." We were inches apart, her hand lifting slowly, trembling, pressing against my chest. I covered her hand with mine, grounding us in the reality of the moment. But before the inevitable could happen, before the distance between us closed, the creak of the upstairs floorboards cut through the air. Footsteps descended. Her son's voice, groggy and half asleep. "Mom?" We froze. Panic lanced through her eyes as he appeared at the top of the stairs, blinking into the kitchen. He looked at her, then at me, confusion shifting into clarity like a sunrise too fast, too brutal. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice cutting through the silence. We jumped apart like children caught in a forbidden act. She scrambled to explain, words stumbling. He He just stopped by. I was making coffee. At 7 in the morning, dressed like that, standing 2 feet away from me. His eyes flickered between us, and then something inside him hardened. "You're kidding me," he said, voice heavy with disbelief. I opened my mouth, desperate to explain, but no words formed. He looked at me then, his expression turning darker, sharper, something I had never seen in him before. "Are you serious right now?" His voice cracked, rising with a pain that cut deeper than anger. "I trusted you, man. You were my best friend." My stomach twisted, my throat dry. "I didn't mean—" I started, but he cut me off, his words spilling like broken glass. "You did. You broke something I can't fix." Then the real fracture came. He turned to her, his mother, his jaw tight, his voice suddenly colder. "Dad already knows." Her face drained of color. "What?" "I told him last night," he said, his voice shaking. "I saw how you looked at each other. I told him something was going on. He said he'd come today. He wants to talk." She sank into a chair as if her body could no longer hold her up, her breath ragged. Oh my God! I felt sick, my mind spinning as the truth unraveled around us, and in that instant everything we thought we could contain collapsed. The doorbell rang, slow and deliberate. Her phone buzzed with a text that made her hands shake as she showed me the screen. Him. "I'm outside. We need to talk now." The storm had arrived. The silence after her son left was deafening, a fragile moment balanced on the edge of collapse. And when she finally spoke, her voice trembled with the weight of boundaries she knew she couldn't hold, insisting it could never happen again, even as her eyes betrayed her and lingered on mine with a hunger neither of us dared admit. I should have left then, should have given her the escape she was clinging to, but the confession slipped out of me like breath, that I thought of her endlessly, that what burned inside me wouldn't vanish, and though she recoiled at first, retreating into practiced defenses, her hands shook as she gripped the counter and whispered that when she told me not to stop her, she had meant it. She had wanted me to close the distance, and the truth in her words ignited a storm between us, only for the fragile electricity to be shattered by the creak of the stairs and her son's voice cutting through the air, suspicion blooming too quickly to be denied.